it. That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
People still believe in higher education, but they don't always see what colleges do for them. Curious why? Me too. Welcome to Pulse Check, the Reputation Rethink, a 5-part series from Enrollify. I'm your host, Kibilds, Vice President of Strategy at Ologie, the branding and marketing agency for organizations with missions that matter. In this series, we'll pull the curtain back on our new national study to surface the disconnects shaping higher ed's reputation. We'll hear from experts who are acting on these insights and give you the tools to start shifting reputation through smarter strategy and storytelling. Now, let's get to today's episode. Welcome to the final episode of Pulse Check, the Reputation Rethink. I'm your host, Kibilds. Throughout this series, we've explored a simple but powerful idea. The public believes in higher education's value. They just don't always see it. We've talked about visibility gaps in research, funding, local community impact, and alumni support. Each of these gaps shapes how people experience colleges and universities in their everyday lives. Today, we're turning to the final finding in our study. People want campuses to be places for ideas, not ideologies. When we asked people across the political spectrum how they feel about the role of colleges and universities in public life, a clear pattern emerged. A majority of respondents, regardless of political affiliation, said they want campuses to be defined by critical thinking, curiosity, and open conversation. Across viewpoints, people told us they want universities to host ideas, not hold them. They want spaces where competing perspectives can be explored. So in this episode, we're hearing directly from the people doing that work, students. I'm joined by 2 student leaders from different campuses who are creating spaces for dialogue, conversation, and respectful disagreement among their peers. Kathleen Parks is a senior at Texas A&M University studying society, ethics, and law, with minors in philosophy and leadership. Kathleen is currently serving as student body vice president. And Mac Mahoney is a senior at Dartmouth College studying politics, philosophy, and economics. Mac is the president of the Dartmouth Political Union, which is Dartmouth's student-run, nonpartisan political organization that hosts weekly meetings for students to discuss relevant political issues, and platforms speakers from across the political spectrum, often in debates, to expose the student body to a wide variety of political thought. They're both here to talk about what creating dialogue actually looks like in practice and what it takes to make it work. Welcome, Kathleen and Mac.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great.
It is notorious in the line of work that I do that getting students to be available to meet with you is the hardest feat. So I'm so grateful that you made time for this morning. When you hear the phrase, campuses should be places for ideas, not ideologies, what does that mean to you as a student leader?
When you are, a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed high school senior and you're going to enroll in college, you're doing it for the explicit purpose of broadening your intellectual horizons. Key in that is you are learning how to think and not what to think. So in my own experience, I've seen that as professors talking a lot about teaching the debate, especially in the social science courses, teaching the competing arguments and, giving students the skills they need to figure out what do they actually think is true instead of just accepting something as dogma. Ultimately, colleges are a place for students to pursue the truth. That requires giving students the agency to make those determinations themselves, right? Which I think has really been an incredible turn in a lot of universities in the past, year and a half.
What does it bring up for you, Kathleen?
Yeah, I totally agree with Mac in that college is intended to be broadening. I know for a lot of students, including myself, it was the first time I was ever leaving home and able to develop my own opinion, whether it was on political matters or my religion or otherwise in any other area. We get to spend the 4 years of college figuring out who we are and what we believe. And it's crucial that we figure out why we believe those things. And now we have information that we've learned ourselves to back it up. And it's also crucial that we have the space to do so. At Texas A&M, I've had the opportunity to come into contact with students of all walks of life. And that has been one of my favorite parts of college because it has been broadening, and it's been some of my most treasured lessons learned, even though they weren't necessarily in the classroom, because I've been able to learn from my peers who come from a different background than I do.
What's uniquely special about you two is that you're both not going through this transformational journey on your own. You're actually working to make these spaces happen for your peers and at your institution. So that's the part of the work that you do as student leaders. What does a safe space for dialogue actually look like in practice?
I'll give some context to my leadership in my organization because I think it's a bit unique. As a student body vice president, I help lead student government. And so we don't necessarily facilitate any kind of political or religious conversations. Those do come up every now and again, but we are primarily concerned with university matters. So when I talk about creating a safe space, I mean in that context. But when we do those things, we know that Texas A&M's impact is global, and there are people from all walks of life. And so it is important that we do create that safe space where every student, no matter where they come from, they feel comfortable to have disputes and to convey their opinion. Our conversations talk a lot about how Texas A&M gets to affect the world. And so they're a bit more positive than, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of why we disagree. It's okay, we may disagree, we may come from different places, but we all have this foundational understanding of values and of who we are and of what this place means to the world. And so we have that to kind of level the playing field. There are 62,000 undergraduate students at A&M and over 1,300 student organizations. So we have all kinds of people, but commonly we share what we call our core values. And those are respect, excellence, loyalty, leadership, integrity, and selfless service. And you ask any student across campus, what are your political beliefs? What are your religious beliefs? And they could be completely different, but you ask them what their core values are, and that is exactly what they would say. And so in a way, we have a bit of the work done for us when it comes to creating a safe space for students, because we know that there is something we all have in common. And that is really helpful when we're navigating tough situations as leaders. We know that there's something there that we can fall back on.
You said, Kathleen, that there were 62,000 students. I had no idea A&M was that big. That's kind of crazy. Dartmouth has like 4,000. So picturing a school of 60,000 people sounds really crazy to me. But I'm going to slightly push back on the framing of the question. So at Dartmouth, our goal isn't actually to create a safe space, but a brave space. And, the idea behind that is that students should expect to encounter ideas that they're uncomfortable with throughout their lives, right? At work, with their partners, whatever it may be. And maybe those ideas are even offensive. We think it's probably best to, equip those students with the skills necessary to engage in those conversations during their time at college, when hopefully the stakes are a little bit lower and it's okay to, figure out what you can and cannot do and what's the best way to actually respond to something. At my organization, at the DPU, we make it really clear that anybody has the ability to share their viewpoint, no matter if the entire room agrees with them or if they're the only one in the room who feels that way. Our goal is really to promote discourse, but also to challenge preconceptions, right? Understand that views are nuanced. It requires students to definitely have buy-in and be like, they're going to hear something that they disagree with. That's okay. We've had heated discussions on topics ranging from abortion to immigration to DEI, Israel and Palestine, really any relevant contentious political issue. We've probably had a group of 60 students in a room talking about it. And nobody can agree on anything. And that's kind of the point. But at the end of the conversation, we're talking about our classes and our clubs, what's happening in the NBA or the NFL, whatever it may be. I really think that it comes down to building a community outside of politics. And Kathleen kind of touched on this, but everybody having the same core values. Yeah, exactly. If you can see somebody not as a conservative or a liberal, but as a Patriots fan or a Seahawks fan, and I'm, particularly upset after the Patriots' really abysmal performance as somebody from New England. But having a friendship, I think, is really key to have these conversations with people who have diametrically opposing views. It can be challenging, but I think that there have been a lot of great resources, at least given to my organization, to help students actually do that, to have buy-in. And I think it's really critical, right? It's hard to talk about politics with somebody who you don't know and maybe you don't trust or you're not willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. But if you do have that like pre-existing relationship, I think it becomes a lot easier.
That actually makes me think of something you said earlier, Kathleen, that it's not just kind of digging into what you believe, but why do you believe in that? And you can't get to that level of introspection and unless you're challenged, unless you're presented with different viewpoints in a trusting environment, in a trusting conversation. Mac, you just said something that I think is a lot of part of this conversation and on people's minds. You said some of the topics may be uncomfortable, some of them may be offensive, right? So how do you two balance openness to different ideas with care for students who may feel personally affected by certain topics?
Yeah, I mean, it's inevitable, right? There's that famous essay, that feminist essay from the 60s. It's like the personal is the political, right? At some point, you're going to have a discussion on a topic where maybe somebody's from that region of the world or they have a family member who's gone through something, related to this. I really think the only option is to just address the issue head on. I think in many ways, our peers really appreciate hearing people's lived experiences, right? Because instead of debating, the abstract or talking about like statistics that maybe people disagree with, like they actually have something to contextualize the issue with. It can definitely become emotional. Like we've seen that. Somebody can have very strong feelings about an issue, and if they think that, their viewpoint is being rebutted, like they may become upset by that. And I think that's like totally normal. But I think generally, at least at Dartmouth, we've seen a really good job of students advancing their arguments or kind of sharing their point of view in a way that is really courteous to those in the room who've made it clear that they have personal connections to something. It really just requires like a great degree of emotional maturity. That's what you come to college for, right? You have to trust students to make those decisions and to handle themselves with that degree of emotional maturity and respect. And at times, like, students are going to screw up. They're going to say something that is offensive or can be taken the wrong way. And when that happens, you ask the person to apologize. One person asks for forgiveness. You find a way for the group to really come together, even after like an offensive comment's been made.
Yeah, Mac, the part about lived experiences, I think, is what resonates with me. While I do go to a giant school, we aren't in any major city. We're just kind of in the middle of Texas. And it feels like a lot of times the issues that you see on the news or the, most pressing issues in our country don't quite affect us because we're kind of isolated. We are like our own city. And so it is helpful on some occasions to hear those personal experiences of people who are affected by certain topics. It feels like sometimes an issue or story isn't deserving of attention until there's a personal experience behind it and some emotion behind it. So I think there is merit to hearing someone's, emotionally charged reason or belief. But with that being said, something I learned this past year, actually in college, a peer called me out on it, is that it's important to have factual information and solid reasoning as to why you believe something. It's very hard to engage in a productive conversation about a controversial topic when your knowledge is surface level and you can't exactly convey why you believe something, but you just say that you believe it. And I've seen that a lot. I was a part of an organization this past year called Titans of Investing. And one of the points of Titans is to better the people around you through conversations called a junto. And it's like a mediated discussion among peers where we just disarm emotion in the room. We all agree we're going to have a civil conversation about this really hard topic. And we had conversations about topics from abortion to the death penalty. Some of our hardest issues to talk about, we got to dig into with this group of about 25 students. And I remember in one of our conversations, I said, well, I am a Christian, and so I believe this. And everyone in the room kind of nodded. They understood. And then someone looked at me and said, but why? Why do you believe that? Can you actually explain it? And since then, I've dug into my beliefs. Why do I believe these things? How will I explain these to people who disagree with me? And so now as a leader, I try to enter conversations that I know are going to be tough with a desire to listen rather than to speak, to listen actively, to put aside my personal opinion and reassure this person that I'm sure there's a reason why they believe these things. And no matter what mine is and, my differing opinion, I'm going to put that aside and I'm going to listen to this person. because that's honestly the only way I found to disarm what would be a very emotional conversation, is to just show that you are human and you are listening. And of course you have beliefs, but that doesn't matter right now.
I think that's such an important lesson because if you understand it, you can explain it. And maybe in the process of that understanding, maybe you learn something different than what you had assumed, right? So you both have done a lot of work, a lot of introspective work to get to a point where you can have conversations that are difficult. And Mac, you said emotional maturity. And Kathleen, I'm hearing a lot of introspection from you. As student leaders who now facilitate some of these conversations and spaces for your peers, how do you set expectations for them about how they should show up? And especially if you know it's going to be a conversation that has strong or opposing views.
Yeah, at least for us, we have these weekly meetings, right? So every week we'll have 50 to 60 students coming to talk about X topic. And usually it's something that's, happening in politics currently. And so for us, we enforce Chatham House rules, right? If you say something in a meeting, your name's not attached to it outside of the meeting, right? We take it pretty seriously. And I think it's something that all of our members really appreciate, regardless of their political views, whether they're in the majority or the minority. We understand that maybe somebody's going to say something that you think is totally outlandish, and you want to go tell your friends and your roommate oh my gosh, I heard this argument today and I have no idea where this person came up with that. And I think that's fine, right? But we want to make sure that we're protecting, students' identities, right? So if you want to engage with an argument, you should be there to do so in good faith instead of just talking about the argument, in a different setting. And so kind of in that same vein, if you say something during a meeting and somebody vehemently disagrees with you, that's awesome. That's what we're all about. But we never let the attacks get personal, right? It's just it's not even something that we really have to say. I'm sure this has also been in Kathleen's experience, but I think students who are engaging in these conversations generally have a pretty good idea of what's okay and what isn't. And so you can absolutely disagree with somebody on principle or, data, whatever, but it's never personal. And I think just one more little thing that we do during the meetings that can kind of smooth things along, smooth things over, is that we limit disruptive reactions. So if you make a comment and half the room agrees with you and half the room disagrees with you, there won't be people snapping or giving you faces or dirty looks, right? It's not we don't want it to become a boisterous space that isn't conducive to discourse. This should be a space for students to share their feelings, their genuine thoughts on the issue. And if, there's not an environment for that, students will stop coming. So we really try to preserve that environment. And these are the steps that we've taken that we found to be relatively successful for doing that.
Yeah, Mac, I like how y'all have these ground rules that just govern your conversations. That seems incredibly helpful. Because of the nature of my organization, we don't have those because we don't ever formally have conversations the way that you do. But I guess my approach to this is something I mentioned a little bit earlier, and it's just the way you present yourself in a conversation. I think it matters so much. Listening, not to speak, but purely to listen, trying to find common ground, trying to affirm the other person just goes a long way in disarming that conversation. I think we're all people, we are all in college, we are all learning, and we come from different backgrounds, and that is so special. And I know there's a lot of people who overlook diversity and who think it doesn't matter, but it is so important. And I've seen that in college with all the peers that I've gotten to work with. Mm-hmm. It's not at all something I've perfected. I've had tons of conversations where I walk away and think, wow, I can't believe I held myself that way. That was terrible. I'm a terrible leader. But it's just so important to be introspective and to learn from those things.
Yeah. I think one of the neat things about this conversation, and you two in particular, is how different your institutions are and the type of work that you do, but the parallels, right? That, Dartmouth is having these weekly organized conversations. And then Kathleen, for you, it happens a little bit more organically in different spaces that you might be in, but you're sort of leading by example in those environments. So that's part of what's rich about having both of your viewpoints in this, because our listeners might be at institutions that are similar to yours or in between. So there's different approaches. I think that's what's important here. Mac, you just said something that leads me to my next question. The students who participate in these conversations, they tend to know how to behave. But What about the students who don't participate? How do you encourage participation for those who might be hesitant or completely disengaged or worried about showing up and saying the wrong thing?
Yeah, I think in today's world, hesitation and disengagement are just a given. There's always going to be people who just don't care as much as you do about something. Not to throw it back to the size of A&M again, but it really does affect every single thing that we do. We have 62,000 undergrads. We actually have 80,000 students just on this campus here. It is humongous.
It's a small city.
That is
it is
really large.
It is a small city, and we do refer to it as a city, which is so awesome. I've learned that there are students here who are great people, and this does not take away from that whatsoever, but they just don't care. They don't want to talk about politics. They don't want to talk about university politics. They don't want to vote. There's just so many things that students are not willing to do because we have so many things in front of us. We are in college. We are job hunting. We are figuring out our future. So I don't blame them necessarily. But I do think we have a responsibility to be engaged, and we have a responsibility to care. And with that, we should understand that college is all about learning. I have a mentor who says that this is our learning laboratory. We can make as many mistakes as we want. It doesn't matter. And so I really like how Mac talked about the Chatham House having this rule of it doesn't leave the room, or it doesn't leave the house after things are said. Because I think that level of protection would make students feel safe in expressing their opinions and maybe encourage them to be more engaged than they are. I think today with social media and phones being everywhere and in our faces, a lot of us, including myself, sometimes are scared to say the wrong thing or something that might hurt us in the future. But we are learning, and we get to have these free conversations, and we get to disengage with one another. And it is so important to do that now and to learn from each other now.
Let's take a quick pause to talk about something big happening this summer, Engage Summit 2026. The next era of higher ed isn't about adding more tools, it's about building an agentic campus where AI works alongside your teams to recruit smarter, support students faster, and scale impact without burning people out. From real-world examples of agentic systems in action to hands-on sessions that show how AI can coordinate enrollment, marketing, advising, and operations, Engage Summit is where institutions move from experimentation to execution. If you're ready to design a campus where AI doesn't just assist, but instead acts, learns, and drives real outcomes, then you'll want to be in Charlotte this summer, June 15th through the 17th. But it gets even better. As an Enrollify listener, you can grab your ticket for half off. Just head to engage.element451.com and use my code Mallory50 to apply the 50% off discount. That's MALLORY50. I can't wait to see you there. Now let's get back to the conversation.
Day, I think that is like the $1 million question, right? That's what everybody's trying to figure out. I want to echo everything Kathleen said. There are going to be contingents of the population that just aren't interested in this, and that's totally okay. I mean, like college is an experience for everyone that's wildly different, and like if you don't want to be in a room, on a Thursday night talking about, the latest developments in Washington, D.C., like on policy, I don't necessarily blame you. There can be more fun things to do. But I think there's a really great pull for students with being like, these are skills that are necessary for your future, right? You're going to have difficult conversations at the workplace, right? In your home, whatever it may be. Like, equip yourself with the ability to have some introspection, reflect on your own beliefs. And as Kathleen said earlier, like, just listen, right? We make it totally clear that it's okay to come and just listen in a meeting. Not everyone's an expert on everything. And if people just want to like sit and hear what, both sides have to say, like we 100% welcome that. We think that's great. But I really think to attract students to come to the conversation in the first place, it's really about building a social community, right? There needs to be this like culture of camaraderie. Because if you view a political community as like a social community first, like maybe you're more inclined to become a part of that community because, in addition to talking about whatever policy debate is happening on the Hill that week, like they're also going on a hike or whatever you guys do in your small city in Texas A&M. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff because you have like 80,000 people. For Dartmouth, it's a lot of hiking. So like, I think that there are a lot of really important non-political, non-discourse things that are required to lay the groundwork to have these conversations.
That makes me think, right, that this work can't happen in isolation. You are student leaders and you're facilitating a lot of this, but you need to be supported by your institutions as well, especially to create those communities, from having a place where conversations happen to having resources that you get to allocate to the types of activities that you want to support. So what do you think the university's role should be in supporting this work that you do to create these brave spaces for dialogue? I changed it for you, Mac.
Thanks, Guy.
That's awesome.
I've been doing this for, 4 years, my 4 years that I've been on campus. And we have a new president at Dartmouth, President Bylock. And I remember in her inaugural address, which was a couple years ago now, that she was stressing the importance of Dartmouth dialogues, right? This was long before October 7th and the unrest that has unfolded on college campuses across the country. And it's really just been like a priority for her administration. And I've been so incredibly grateful to have been able to work with her administration on this. I think if institutions have the resources to help bring speakers to campus to like help students do that, I think that's excellent. But I also recognize that not every institution has those resources. Like maybe it's a really small school, maybe it's a really big school, and there's just too many competing interests. There's like a myriad of things that the administration can be doing. Give students a seat at the table. It sounds like Kathleen does that with student government, right? There's all these new types of dialogue programming popping up across the country. Like, be the school that sets the expectation that like students were going to be involved in making these decisions. And also, like, be honest with students that you're going to encounter ideas that are uncomfortable. And that's a good thing, right? Like, it's something that's necessary to be successful in life. And I really think, like, the last thing is getting the professors on board, right? I mentioned this earlier, but, like, teaching the debate, Obviously, in some cases, like, you can't really do that, right? Like, we all know the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and like, there's
we all know that. Oh yeah.
there's no debate there. But like, I think in a lot of courses, there's room for teaching. This is what one theory is, and this is the evidence that doesn't support it, and vice versa. And I really think, again, it's about equipping students with those conversational skills, but also the ability to think critically and, make those judgments for themselves.
I completely agree with Mac that students should be at the table and we should have a say in these things. Through my experience in student government, one of the unique things that we get to do is we get to be at those tables. And our university is really great about always including the student opinion on whatever committee or working group is happening about any given topic. We have a member of the student body on the university president's cabinet. We have a student on the strategic budget council for the university. We have students everywhere. Just a little shout out to A&M. I think they do a great job of keeping students at the heart. But as far as formal avenues to engage in civil discourse and to learn these skills outside of the classroom, we have several. We have a new one that was launched this year called the Aggie Lyceum. It's modeled after the Texas Lyceum, and through weekly workshops and lectures from professors and experts, students can learn these key skills from experts that we have here at home. And some of the topics that they've discussed are how to think like a lawyer, how to practice active listening, and how our core values that I mentioned earlier can play into leadership out in the real world. I think there's something so special about leveraging the expertise you have at your university, but outside of the classroom, giving students who maybe study engineering, but they want to learn about how they can read or think like a lawyer, giving them that opportunity to come and learn from our experts outside of their discipline. It's an incredible opportunity. I've gotten to attend multiple workshops and learned so much myself. We will also have a new student organization on campus, actually created by a freshman this year, which is so cool. It's called The Stance, and they are very up and coming, but they are devoted to promoting and practicing civil discourse on campus, kind of sounding similar, I hope, to what Mac has going on at Dartmouth. I hope that's the form it will take. But just the fact that it was started by a freshman and that students are interested in this is very encouraging. And lastly, Our chancellor recently, who oversees our whole system, there's many universities in the system, recently charged all of the system schools with hosting some sort of event around civil discourse. It'll look different for each school, but we want to show that we have a system-wide commitment to civil discourse and to having civic-minded students. And we like to say that we are graduating not just great Aggies, but great citizens. We'll go out into the world, we'll be informed, we'll be engaged, we'll care about our communities. And so what we are doing here in College Station as the flagship campus is we are hosting a civil discourse symposium in April. And students will get the chance to hear from state and national leaders. We have several congressional representatives. We also have a former vice president of the United States coming, as well as several other distinguished guests. And students will have the opportunity to hear and learn from them and see how they've practiced these key skills that we're being equipped with in their professional lives. And we'll also get to engage in mediated conversations for several hours throughout that day. I think this is a very unique opportunity. Texas A&M has committed a lot of effort and resources to putting this on, and I'm very thankful because it is so important to understand the value of civil discourse in leadership. And A&M is addressing this national need that, all students need to know this. It's such a head-on and public way. And I'm getting to be a part of that, which I'm very excited about. But I'm also just excited to participate and get to learn from these experts.
I feel like I just had an aha moment, how you two have been talking about this as a skill. It's a skill that you practice, that you learn, and that your institution has a hand in making sure that you do that. Because when you graduate, when you go out into the world, and even now as student leaders, right, like this is having an effect on your lives, but also the lives of the people around you. And it's something that can be taught in a way, how to have conversations. So how do you think the work that you're doing supports students and future graduates beyond their life on campus or their life as students, in particular thinking about their workplaces or the communities they're going to live in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Mac said it really well earlier. We are going to have hard conversations in the workplace. It is inevitable. And so having safe spaces or brave spaces on campus where we can practice now before we have to go out into the real world and actually practice, I guess, for real.
For real?
It just further equips students to excel and to stand out in the workplace because they can navigate these tough times like a pro. At Texas A&M, we are the proud owner of what we call the Aggie Network. It's our alumni network. We all wear these rings, and we connect former students with opportunities across the world. And it's important, as I mentioned earlier, to us that we are graduating good citizens, not just good Aggies. We don't just want to graduate proud of where we came from and proud of our time at Texas A&M, but we want to hold on to our core values. And we want to hold on to these skills that we learned, such as practicing civil discourse. That's what sets us apart. And so I think that engaging in it now and learning this skill now and practicing equips us to go out when the stakes are higher, because right now they're fairly low. But when the stakes are high and our job is on the line or we're having a tough conversation with our boss, we are going to be well equipped because we've been able to practice in this safe environment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like you took the words like right out of my mouth. I don't know if I can add too much more to that. I think that was like the perfect answer. It's a tough job market right now, right? Like a lot of the entry level roles, like it seems like they can be done by AI. And, I think there's a real nervousness among students and their parents about like, will they get a good return on their investment, right? And so I think like being an effective communicator is really like an essential skill for this job market, and it probably will be for the next few decades. Again, you're going to encounter people who disagree with you, right? They're going to be offensive. There might be like downright inflammatory. Mm-hmm. You should have those skills, and you shouldn't be forming those skills with your boss, right? Like the stakes are high, as Kathleen said. Right. Like let's do it when you're at college and you can like figure out the best way to approach something. I think Dartmouth's mission really captures this. It's to educate the most promising students and prepare them for a lifetime of learning and responsible leadership. I think responsible is really the key word there. Like responsible leadership inherently requires the ability to have these tough conversations, right? If you want to go into business, if you want to go into politics, whatever it may be, like you're going to have to deal with people who disagree with you, and like you need to be able to have those conversations. As much as it's like just a good skill to have as a person, right? I think it's like a sign of intellect to be able to engage with people who disagree with you. Like it's also a really great thing to have on your resume, right? I've talked with, previous bosses like, oh, what's the political union? That sounds really cool. Like, who are some of the speakers that you've brought? Like, what are some of the student debates that you've had? I think people who are recruiting are, interested in seeing that you have like a demonstrated ability to have tough conversations. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I love the term responsible leadership. It makes me think of your informed and engaged comment from earlier, Kathleen, right? Like it's like an active participation in the spaces that you're in. If you could both give one piece of advice to another campus, listening now, trying to create healthier dialogue in their own communities, what would your piece of advice be?
I would say that each campus and student body looks completely different, and it's important not to forget that. Between Dartmouth and Texas A&M, it sounds like we both have the same great things going on, but just in our own way, and that adhere to our own mission and values. It's so important to consider your mission and values, as well as what does your student body look like? Where do they come from? When attempting to create healthier dialogue on campus. But regardless of, what your student body looks like, it is important to equip students with these key skills that we've been talking about, with media literacy, with the ability to speak publicly, to mediate conversations, and so many more. These are crucial to set us apart in the workplace and for us to excel in our professional lives. I would encourage any university to leverage the expertise that they already have on campus in their faculty and administration to make sure that they are equipping their students for the best possible return on investment of their degree.
I think part of the problem is that we're just so polarized as a country that any shift in how any institution, doesn't have to be universities, business, whatever, goes about conducting their businesses can be seen as political. And I think that can alienate some people, which is a shame because I think something like this really isn't political and it really shouldn't be alienating people, right? Like the whole point is to bring people together to have these conversations. With that being said, I don't think there's a perfect approach that will satisfy everyone within a community, right? At points this can be contentious. And so it really requires having bold solutions and recognizing that maybe everybody won't be 100% on board. Maybe they'll like the idea, but they disagree with some aspect of the execution. I mean, maybe they won't even like the idea, right? It's possible. That's okay. Ultimately, if you are a leader in the university, then you know that the purpose of a university is to pursue the truth. That should be your guiding light. And so pursuing the truth requires putting arguments, in contestation with each other and letting the weak arguments get weeded out. And then I think the last thing is just don't gaslight students, right? Don't tell students that when they come to college, it's just going to be happy flowers, sunshine, rainbows, all the time. That's what it should be in a lot of ways. And I think it is in many ways, but you're going to encounter things that you disagree with, and that's life. And I think, part of the mission of higher education is it requires administrations and students to give members of the community the tools to have, these conversations to make them effective leaders. This cannot be a top-down approach. If you don't have student buy-in, no matter how much money you put in it or how many administrators you hire or programs you create, it won't work. You need students to be invested in this. And we've talked a lot about this during our conversation, but that requires giving them a seat at the table.
Yeah. So the work that I do, right, it's university marketing. And one of the things that every university wants to say is, this is a space where you will belong. You will belong. And we're always talking about these very positive, you're going to have community, you will belong, you will belong. But it's difficult for institutions to say openly, actually, yes, part of that belonging is going to be you having some difficult moments, which, to your point, right? That happens everywhere. It's happening everywhere. And it should be, because that's part of growth, right? I like to equate everything to being an athlete, even though I am not, right? If you want to get stronger, it's going to hurt. If you want to get faster, it's going to hurt. So being uncomfortable is just part of growth. My last question to you both, I'm hoping kind of helps introduce a little bit of hope, right? So for us folks who work with students, we love it. We love working with students because we see in you the future. And so you right now are in the middle of the types of spaces and conversations that are going to become society, right? In a few years, in a few decades. What are you seeing right now as a result of this work that you're doing that gives you hope for how we'll relate to each other in broader society?
I personally find hope in the work that A&M is doing to champion civil dialogue across campus. This is a relatively newer effort. I mean, I think back to early in college, and I don't remember seeing the things that I'm seeing now. And I don't remember A&M's commitment to equipping students in this way that I now see. And so I'm very encouraged by the fact that they recognize this growing need that I think is present at every institution across the country, that they are now trying to meet. I'm confident that our students and our graduates will help shape stronger, more thoughtful communities around the world because of what we're learning here. As I'm a senior, Mac's a senior. It's a sad time, but it's a very reflective time. I am so pleased to see this growing emphasis, and I really do think that it'll pay dividends in our future.
You know, I think at least at Dartmouth, and it sounds like A&M's kind of showing the same level of institutional commitment. I've been just so very excited, honestly. Like, you know, Dartmouth has an institutional restraint policy now, right? The administration is, you know, providing a lot of resources for Dartmouth dialogues. And I think part of it is that there's like this growing appetite among, well, I guess the whole student body, but specifically the underclassmen, at least, you know, at Dartmouth, 2/3 of the first year students, the class of 2029, said that Dartmouth Dialogues was a significant factor in their decision to attend. And I've like seen this to be true, right? Like there's a lot of freshmen who are always at our meetings. They are really excited to have these conversations. And I think that's really wonderful. I think high school students, college students, they look at the state of politics today and they're like, wow, we can do way better than that. You know, it's hard to be a rational person and like look at the way that our politicians talk to each other, or, you know, see how interest groups and advocacy groups like vilify and dehumanize their opponents and think, this is normal, this is okay. Young people are noticing that. And I think now is really the time for universities to capitalize on this interest to really form the leaders that our country needs.
Wow. Thank you both so much for being here today. The way that you're showing up for your peers and creating space for real conversation is deeply encouraging. And I know I myself, I'm a huge fan of you two, and every single listener is going to be a huge fan as soon as they got to this point of the episode. And, you know, as seniors, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so excited to see where your leadership is going to take you next. I know you're going to do a big thing.
Thank you, Day.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
As we wrap up this final episode, I want to zoom back out to where we started. This series was grounded in one central insight from Ologie's reputation Rethink study. The public still believes in higher education's value. They just don't always see it. Over 5 episodes, we explored what sits behind that disconnect. We talked about research that saves lives but often stays out of view. We talked about funding that feels confusing when its impact isn't visible. We talked about communities who feel their local institutions have not really been showing up for them. And we talked about alumni who want support that lasts beyond graduation. And today, we talked about campuses as places for ideas, dialogue, and learning how to think together. Taken on their own, each of these is a visibility gap. Taken together, they point to something bigger. Reputation isn't shaped by what institutions say about themselves. It's shaped by what people can see, experience, and feel in their own lives. What this research makes clear is that changing the narrative about higher education requires showing up more clearly, more consistently, and closer to home. For communicators, leaders, faculty, and staff, your opportunity is this: make the invisible visible, translate complexity into meaning, and create real connections with the communities that you serve. Thank you for spending this time with us and for the work that you do every day to help colleges and universities live up to their potential. This has been Pulse Check the Reputation Rethink by Ologie.
The Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Brian Gross, Eddie Francis, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.